This story reveals how laziness leads to poverty. Two brothers stood before the same old gate, the same keys in their palms, the same father's land stretching out under a wide sky. They inherited the same house with its crooked chimney, the same weathered plow, the same row of apple trees that had fed 3 generations. And yet, when years folded into seasons, what followed them looked nothing alike. How could two men begin at the same line and end up in such different places? Marcos woke with the rooster. He moved through his mornings as if they were small promises he needed to keep, a promise to the soil, to the animals, to the roof that sheltered his children. He would step into the dew, feel the sharp smell of turned earth, listen to the distant cluck of hens and the low hum of the road beyond the hill. He repaired a fence in the cool hours before the heat, tightening a post, driving a nail, smoothing a rock gate with the same patience he'd used to mend the family table. For Marcos, work was the daily architecture of security, small acts stacked one on top of another until they formed a shelter. Tomas stretched his mornings under the apple tree. He watched sunlight lace through the leaves and thought about the song of the day rather than its labor. A drink with neighbors, a visit into town for a laugh, a new coat bought with money that had been meant for plowing. He chose the lighter pleasures. He liked the idea of comfort more than the slow, unglamorous path that led to it. He could not see, or would not see, that comfort without foundation slips away when weather turns. Between their yards, an ant trail kept its steady track. It was little at first, a thin, unbroken line running from a crack in the old granary out to a patch of clover. Marcos noticed them often. He watched the ants carrying crumbs twice their size back to the dark of their nest, saw how every insect repeated the same small motion without complaint. He would sit sometimes, leaning against the fence, and think, small, regular effort builds a store that will be there when the sky changes. The ants did not rush or revel, they prepared. Summer was warm and long the year they divided the land. It felt generous and endless. Heat shimmered along the dirt roads, the smell of fresh-cut hay floated in the air, and the sun came early enough to reward whoever rose with it. Marcos planted deep and straight. He hoed, he weeded, he saved a corner of seed for the next spring. He split logs in the evenings, stacking them in a neat pyramid against the lean-to, the dry ends facing away from the damp earth. He patched the roof where a loose tile let in the first sighs of rain. He taught his children how to mend a broken tool and how to count a harvest so nothing was wasted. Tomas spent the summer eating the present. He sold a strip of his field to a merchant who wanted quick money for a speculative venture in the town market.
He fixed up his house just enough to look tidy at a distance. He did not fix the seams where cold would later bite. He bought a new cloak and a brighter lamp. When friends came, he invited them with wine and easy jokes. There is a peculiar charm to the person who loves today more than tomorrow. People are drawn to the splendor of his table and the warmth of his laugh. Yet charm does not mend broken beams, and laughter does not fill a pantry cleared by neglect. Neighbors watched and then spoke in low, human tones. They marveled at Marcos's industry or whispered about Tomas's generosity, for Tomas gave often, but what he gave was usually what should have been saved. The gossip that could have shamed him never hardened into judgment. Instead, it washed over him like summer wind, pleasant and forgettable. Marcos, for his part, would sometimes pass Tomas in the lane and say nothing about his plans. He tended his own plot, returning each evening to the smell of wood smoke and the sight of jars lined up on a shelf, preserves glinting like small suns in the pantry. He would also watch the ants. In the heat of the day, he'd notice a line extending its reach, carrying away a flea-sized treasure. Marcos thought of the line as a lesson you could read with your eyes, the power of repetition, the refusal to be distracted by a single bright hour. He would tell his eldest child, not as reproach but as counsel, "When the sky changes, the work will speak for you." The child would nod, handling a seed like a small, heavy promise. The summer that felt like it would never end finally gave up its light to fall. Clouds, at first polite and thin, became thick and sure. The air sharpened overnight as if an invisible hand had tightened a bolt. Frost started to lace the windows along the valley. A cold wind learned to find the small holes in the eaves. When autumn harvests were tallied and the last of the apples were stacked in baskets, reality made its claims. Marcos's barn was full. The jars in his pantry made a soft, confident sound when he stacked them. The woodpile was 3 rows deep and well sheltered from wet. He had mended the roof so it bet back the first rains. His animals were sheltered, their breath misting in the stable like small clouds. He had labeled sacks of flour and set a few coins aside as if to test his discipline. There was no boasting in his abundance, only quiet evidence of choices kept. Tomas's house had begun to make small betrayals. A shingle moved where a bird had burrowed a weakness. In the first storm, a trickle found a seam and traced cold fingers down a plaster wall. He patched it with what handymen call improvisation: a cloth, a smear of glue, a hurried wedge. He had sold his ox that summer to pay for a party that now felt like a memory beside a new, harder truth. Money spent does not return with interest, and the market rarely offers what you need when you need it most.
The first real winter arrived with a cruelty that was simple and fair. Wind came like a teacher that does not tolerate excuses. It cooled at the eaves and found the small holes left by inattention. Snow put white collars on the hedgerows, and the road between the brothers' fields became a ribbon of silence. Smoke curled straight from Marcos's chimney, promising a fire that would be fed through the dark months. At Tomas's house, the chimney sputtered. He had not stoked it enough to create a lasting bank of coals. Hunger is not an idea. It is a feeling that travels in the body, a hollow, a thing that sharpens the mind and makes hands small and pleading. Tomas woke to the metallic cry of want. The pantry had held a quiet economy of jars and sacks. Months of indulgence had emptied it to a few meager things that would not stretch. He knocked the dust off the corners and counted coins that could not buy back the crops he'd sold, nor the hours he had let drift. There came a night when the roof finally complained more loudly than the patchwork could quiet. Rain found its voice in a slow, insistent drip, and for the first time the ceiling's small leaks wrote their map on Tomas's table. He sat with the sound and felt the sum of his choices settle into his bones. He could have blamed the sky, or the world, or bad luck. Instead, he rose and wrapped his cloak tighter and walked. The road between brothers is a short one, but in the dark it can feel as long as a country. Tomas's boots thudded on packed earth. Snow hissed and clung to his sleeves. His breath came in white bursts. Ants were no longer visible in the frost, but their lesson had not left him. He thought of them now with a new, bitter clarity, how the season waits for no excuse, and how tiny, consistent acts build a refusal against disaster. When Tomas reached Marcos's gate, the lamp by the door shone like an honest eye. He had rehearsed the approach in his head and undone it a dozen times. Shame made him speak in small doses, short sentences, no explanations. When he knocked, his knuckles stung from the cold, and his voice when it came was barely a reed. "Brother," he said, "I need shelter. I need some bread." Marcos opened the door without counting the cost. There was no lecture at first, no long list of errors recited to a worn man standing in a cloak dusted with snow. Marcos saw a brother who had failed to prepare, and who now bore the humble, human weight of consequence. He saw someone who needed warmth. He saw in Tomas's eyes the thinness of a man who had traded tomorrow for the glitter of a single day, and he moved to thaw both the body and the bride. Inside, the house was simple but steady. The fire had a kind of polite authority that comes from fuel and preparation. Marcos pushed a chair close to the blaze and set a bowl of stew in front of Tomas. Steam rose in small, fragrant clouds, the smell of broth, of carrots, of onions and herb.
The sound of a spoon against ceramic was gentle and ordinary in a way that can be more merciful than words. Tomas ate like a man discovering kindness might still be possible. Later, once the initial need had been met, Marcos spoke. He did not scold. He did not sharpen his voice into a blade to cut the man who had come in from the cold. Instead, he asked questions that guided rather than judged. What did you spend the year on? What did you set aside? What would you do next time if you could choose? Tomas answered small, honest things. He admitted to being pleased by immediate comforts. He told of the market's bright lights and how easy it was to forget a roof while buying laughter. There was regret in him now, a quiet grief for what had been used up. He did not ask for a lecture. He asked for a chance. Marcos listened. Then he offered practical help, not a miracle. He taught Tomas how to start stacking wood properly so it would dry through the spring. He showed him how to repair a seam to hold back rain until they could put on a stronger patch. He set aside a bit of seed and suggested a small plot Tomas could tend through the first thaw. "You can build again," Marcos said, piece by piece, with steady hands. The tone was not triumphal. It was a promise without magic. This is the heart of the lesson. The connection between lazy patterns and real deprivation is not mystical. It is simple arithmetic made of daily choices. A sold field cannot be replanted by wishes. An empty pantry cannot be filled with courage alone. Yet the opposite is true too. Repeated, modest acts of care, starting early, mending what is broken, storing a portion of harvest, add up into a buffer against the seasons. Tomas did not change overnight. Some habits are like old bones. They take time to warm. But in the shelter of his brother's house, he learned to measure pleasure against provision, to recognize how a single small indulgence had echoed into months of want. He learned that dignity of work that was not flashy but true, the kind that bears fruit not only in food, but in the calm that comes from knowing you have done what you could to protect those you love. Neighbors noticed the change in Tomas slowly, in the way he came in earlier to tend a tool, or the way he walked without the urgency that used to drive him. He repaired his roof in honest stages, patch by patch, and after the thaw he returned to a modest, disciplined planting. He watched ants again, not with the amusement of before, but with a sober respect. The image of those tiny workers walking in line, each carrying something useful, became for him a symbol of the life he wanted. Small acts, steady and repeated. Still, the story is not a simple moral of blame. Poverty is rarely born of a single cause. There are storms life throws that no preparation can fully fend off.
Yet in this tale, the thread is clear. A pattern of neglect, of preferring immediate ease to slow accumulation, created openings where hardship could enter. Laziness, in the sense of habitual avoidance of necessary work, eroded Tomas's foundation until weather and time revealed the weakness. Marcos's compassion did not mean that the two men were now equal in their outcomes. It meant that what remained human, empathy, the capacity to help, the willingness to teach, was more potent than pride. He offered a hand that was firm and practical. He taught skills. He gave a space to learn the hard arithmetic of stewardship. Mercy, in his hands, was not a mercy that excused error. It was a mercy that restored agency. Ask yourself, what small daily acts are you neglecting right now? Is there a corner of your life where you are spending today at the expense of tomorrow? The ants teach an uncomplicated truth. Consistency matters. The seasons do not repent for our shoes being thin. The cold wind will find the smallest hole. If this story strikes you, write down one thing you can change this week. Type "I choose diligence" in the comments if you're ready to build for the future and to let small choices add up. Say it as a promise to yourself, not as a confession to be punished, but as a commitment to steady, patient work. This tale shows a clear pattern, not an absolute law. Laziness, when it becomes a habit, often leads to scarcity because it drains the resources, time, money, and trust that create safety. Diligence does not promise sudden riches, but it does create resilience, a shelter against seasons that will inevitably change. In the final scene, when spring put its green back into the grass and the snow melted into honest water, Tomas and Marcos stood together at the edge of a small field. They were not the same men they had been. One had learned humility, the other mercy. They worked side by side, hands stinging with cold as they planted seed in straight rows. Ants marched in the dirt by their feet, carrying fragments as they always had, and for the first time, Tomas watched them with an understanding no sermon could have given. This story reveals how laziness leads to poverty, not as a judgment, but as a caution. If you take only one thing from it, let it be this: build steadily. Protect what matters with 1,000 small commitments, and when someone stumbles into the cold, remember to open your door. If this moved you, subscribe and share this story with someone who needs to hear that small habits matter. In the comments, tell one small step you'll take this week to prepare for the seasons ahead.